Welcome. Today we have a very serious and, frankly, very difficult task. We're going to be conducting a thorough examination of the materials you've shared with us.
Yes, it's a comprehensive set of sources, articles, reports, all concerning the tragic case of Sierah Joughin.
Her abduction and murder in Ohio back in 2016, and, importantly, the consequential legal movement that grew out of that tragedy.
Our mission here is to analyze these events, not just what happened, but how the systems in place failed. To start, I think it's vital we ground ourselves in who Sierah was.
Yes, absolutely.
Sierah Catherine Joughin, born in 1996. She was only 20 years old. Her friends and family called her C. She was a promising student at the University of Toledo's Junior College of Business.
Living in Metamora, Ohio, just building her future, really.
And that's what makes this so devastating. Her future was violently taken from her. And this case, as we'll see, it became a flashpoint. It exposed some really critical failures in public safety.
And that failure is the central tension we have to analyze. The sources are very clear on this shocking fact. The man convicted of her murder, James Dean Worley, he had a previous conviction.
A previous conviction for a nearly identical violent crime, an abduction attempt.
And despite this history, he wasn't listed on any state or federal violent offender database when he murdered Sierah.
Not a single one.
It's this gaping loophole that became the focus of the activism that eventually led to the new legislation, to Sierra's law.
Precisely. The system completely failed to monitor a known violent predator. It gave him the anonymity he needed to strike again decades later, using methods that were just. Well, they were remarkably similar to his first documented crime.
We really have to analyze how that lack of transparency led directly to this fatal outcome.
Let's start by spending the necessary time on Sierah Joughin herself, to ground this analysis in her life.
Yes. She graduated from Evergreen High School in 2014. She was studying human resource management and interning at her uncle's metal stamping business.
So a picture emerges of a young woman who was ambitious, who was engaged with her life and her future. Very responsible.
It's this context that makes her disappearance so much more devastating. The crime itself happened on Tuesday, July 19th, 2016.
In Fulton County, Ohio. And we have a very specific time frame, around 6:45 in the evening. She was doing something completely routine.
Just riding her bicycle home from her boyfriend's house. His name was Joshua Kolasinski.
They had been riding together for a little bit near County Road 6, near Metamora, and then they parted ways.
Right, he was on his motorcycle and turned back toward his home, and Sierra continued on her bike alone.
And that was the window. That was the moment the attacker was waiting for.
When she didn't get home, her boyfriend couldn't reach her. The alarm was raised almost immediately.
The initial search started quickly, and it yielded some devastating evidence within just a few hours.
The sources describe the discovery. Her bicycle, which was brightly colored, was found right near where she was last seen.
But it wasn't on the side of the road.
No. It had been dumped several rows deep into a cornfield. The speed they found it just shows how close she was to home.
And how close the search party was to the actual crime scene. The sheriff noted obvious signs of a struggle near the bike. This wasn't just an abandoned bicycle, it was a violent ambush.
Crucially, investigators also found motorcycle tracks running through the cornfield.
Which suggested the attacker used a specific kind of vehicle to drive right into the field and, facilitate the abduction. That really narrowed the initial search profile.
The investigation from there was exhaustive. They used every resource they had. The FBI joined local authorities very quickly.
They tried to use her digital footprint data from her Fitbit and her smartphone.
The search using the phone did get a signal, which must have seemed hopeful at first.
Right, but the signal placed the phone several miles away from where the bike was.
Suggesting it was either carried away from the scene or just thrown out by the abductor during the escape.
So, despite that high-tech effort, it didn't lead to her immediate recovery. The case shifted very quickly from a missing person to a full-scale criminal investigation.
And the public response was just massive. The community, other organizations, they escalated the reward money for information.
It started at $25,000, I believe.
And it swelled to $100,000 very quickly. That just shows you the level of communal fear. This was a safe, rural area, and this kind of violent disappearance was terrifying.
So that initial phase, from 6:45 p.m. to the discovery of the bike, it just set this terrifying stage. The evidence immediately pointed to a highly organized, violent ambush by someone who knew those back roads well.
To understand how this could happen, we have to pivot and look at the man responsible, James Dean Worley.
He was born in Tacoma, Washington on April 8, 1959. His early life was marked by instability.
The sources say his parents divorced when he was 5. The reason cited was his father's alcoholism and abuse.
The family eventually moved back to the Midwest, which is where he grew up. He was actually a product of that same local community. He graduated from Evergreen High School in 1978.
But his school record hinted at some early issues. He later said his very low GPA, a 1.59, was because he was using and selling marijuana since he was about 14.
After school, he worked various jobs. He was a farmer, ground crew, and later a licensed trailer transporter after his second time in prison. On the surface, he was just part of the local scene.
But the critical piece of this is the precedent, the event from decades earlier, the 1990 abduction attempt.
It's not just a similar crime. The parallels are chillingly precise. It demonstrates a pattern that the justice system just failed to contain.
In July 1990, Worley ambushed a woman named Robin Gardner while she was riding her bicycle in White House, Ohio.
Which is geographically close to the 2016 crime scene. And the method of operation targeting a lone woman on a bike, it's almost a blueprint for what happened to Sierah.
Let's detail that 1990 attack because it became so important in the later murder trial. He struck Gardner with his truck.
Hit her on the head, put her in handcuffs, and then held a screwdriver to her throat.
The sources quote his threat, "I'll kill you if you don't stop screaming," as he tried to force her into his truck.
So the use of a vehicle, the immediate restraint, the threat of deadly violence, this was a planned abduction, not a crime of opportunity.
Thankfully, Robin Gardner managed to escape. A passing motorist saw her and picked her up. Worley was arrested and convicted of abduction.
And his sentence was 4 to 10 years. He could have served a decade.
And here it is. This is the profound failure of the system that made Sierra's murder possible, despite the extreme violence of that 1990 crime.
Running a woman down with a vehicle, handcuffing her.
He only served 3 years of that sentence. He was granted an early release by petition in 1993.
It's a decision that's really difficult to reconcile with the severity of the offense. It put a known violent abductor back on the streets.
And it didn't lead to rehabilitation. He was back in prison in 2000.
This time for cultivating marijuana and possessing weapons while on disability, which were felonies.
So this is his second major incarceration. And yet again, after serving only 2 years, he successfully petitioned for another early release in 2002.
So what you, the listener, need to grasp is this. Worley's adult criminal life involved 2 serious felony convictions, and in both cases, the system granted him early release.
Reducing his time served to just a fraction of the maximum sentence.
And this sequence establishes a highly dangerous pattern, a documented history of violent abduction attempts.
Followed by a failure of the state to keep him incarcerated. And, crucially, a complete failure to register or track him afterward.
The laws at the time simply didn't require a violent offender registry, so a man who ran a woman down with his truck and handcuffed her was allowed to live anonymously in the very same community where he would commit a fatal, identical crime years later.
The lack of tracking became the fatal flaw.
And the investigation into Sierra's disappearance quickly led right to him. The initial evidence they found near her bike was foundational.
Investigators were incredibly meticulous. They recovered items that clearly didn't belong to Sierra. A pair of men's sunglasses, a screwdriver, a box of automotive fuses.
The sunglasses were tested, and they provided male DNA, which would become critical later on.
And just as important was something a passing driver found. A motorcycle helmet, nearby, with a visible bloody handprint on it.
That immediately became a key piece of evidence. And it's important for you to know that investigators quickly accounted for Sierra's boyfriend's helmet.
Right, so they ruled him out definitively. The search focused on the owner of this bloodied helmet.
And the presence of that screwdriver. It's a tragic echo of the weapon Worley used in the 1990 attack.
So, investigators started canvassing the area, and this is where Worley, who lived less than 2 miles away, inserts himself into the investigation.
He told officers his motorcycle had broken down in the exact area where Sierra's bike was found.
And that he had lost items that perfectly matched the description of the sunglasses, the screwdriver, and the fuses.
His statements were just. They were highly suspicious. He claimed he found 2 bikes in the corn and that he took one, saying it would have his fingerprints on it.
But the real red flag was his unprompted denial. He told the officers, "I didn't steal anything or kill anyone."
That immediate defensiveness screamed guilt, and his claims placed him directly at the scene with an alibi that was just far too coincidental.
And then the circumstantial links became hard confirmation. A crucial piece of information came from a citizen.
A witness reported seeing a passenger van driving at a very high speed near the abduction site, right around the time Sierra went missing.
And they had a license plate number.
That plate number was registered directly to James Worley.
At that moment, law enforcement knew they weren't dealing with a random person who lost his sunglasses. They were dealing with a documented violent offender linked by vehicle and location to the disappearance of a young woman on a bike.
Just like his previous victim. This information immediately led to a search warrant for his property.
The search of his property, especially the barn, revealed some truly disturbing evidence of premeditation.
Inside, they found a green chest. It contained several pairs of women's underwear, one of them stained with blood.
They also found restraints, handcuffs, and most chillingly, a large freezer that had been lined with carpet and was stained with blood.
That detail, the carpet-lined freezer, is so vital, it just screams of calculated planning.
Why else would you line a freezer with carpet?
Unless you intend to put someone inside it, maybe to muffle sounds or contain forensic evidence. It points toward a serial pathology, the intention to hold a victim.
And the forensics confirmed it. Sierah Joughin's DNA was found on duct tape and on an inflatable mattress inside that barn.
The abduction, the assault, it happened on that property.
And the evidence kept mounting. There was blood on Worley's motorcycle. Inside his truck, they found more restraints, zip ties this time, and a ski mask.
They also discovered recording devices placed all over the property.
His digital footprint destroyed his alibi. Cell phone records conclusively placed Worley in the immediate area of the abduction scene for nearly 2 hours.
So his story about a brief motorcycle breakdown was a demonstrable lie. He had more than enough time to carry out the abduction.
And this is where it connects back to his profile. Investigators found something chilling. After his 1990 conviction, Worley had told a court-mandated therapist that he learned from each abduction he had done and the next one he was going to bury.
It wasn't just a threat, it was a mission statement that he carried out in 2016.
Worley was arrested on July 22nd, 3 days after Sierra disappeared, on abduction charges.
And tragically, the recovery happened the same day as the arrest. That evening, around 6 p.m., Sierra's remains were found in a shallow grave along County Road 7, just a few miles from Worley's property.
The autopsy confirmed the horrific circumstances. Her body was found intact, but she had been severely restrained, described as hogtied.
Her wrists were handcuffed and bound to her ankles behind her back, and she had been gagged with a large plastic toy.
The cause of death was asphyxiation, directly from that gag.
And this detail was significant for the prosecution. While there was no evidence of sexual assault, the amount of force used to insert the gag, it was enough to break one of her teeth, that argued for an intent to kill.
Not just to silence her, but to cause her death through suffocation. His final act was to bury her body about 2 feet deep in that field.
The evidence was just overwhelming. It led to immediate capital charges.
On August 16, 2016, Worley was indicted on 19 counts, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, felonious assault.
He pleaded not guilty to all of them.
And given the premeditation and the nature of her death, prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty.
The trial was highly anticipated. It required a huge pool of potential jurors because of the intense local publicity. Testimony finally began in March 2018.
Let's focus on the prosecution's theory of the crime. They painted a picture of calculated, organized violence.
They alleged that Worley had been watching pornography right up until the moment he ambushed Sierra. They argued the attack on County Road 6 was intentional. He struck her with his motorcycle helmet,
which would account for the blood and DNA they found on it, and likely knocked her unconscious.
The prosecution then used his cell phone data to map out his movements. They alleged he waited in that cornfield for nearly 2 hours until it was dark,
during which time he called his brother to set up his false alibi about the broken-down motorcycle.
They argued he then drove his van, which matches the witness report of a speeding van, back to the scene and transported Sierra back to his barn.
And the final confrontation. This was the most difficult part of the trial. The prosecution argued he physically assaulted her, hogtied her, and then inserted the gag with extreme force.
The broken tooth was the key forensic indicator of his intent to cause death by asphyxiation.
And finally, that he transported her body and buried her in that shallow grave. The entire narrative was built on a pattern of planning that went back decades.
The defense's arguments had to rely on denial and just trying to create reasonable doubt. Worley maintained he never even encountered Sierra.
And to explain the disturbing items in his barn, the restraints, the underwear, the defense came up with this idea that it was all for a pornography studio he was planning to start.
A claim one of his friends sort of supported on the stand. They also tried to explain away the crime scene evidence, arguing he'd just lost the helmet and other items there earlier in the day.
They needed to neutralize the DNA evidence. The defense argued the concentration of Worley's DNA on the helmet was low, suggesting maybe someone else used it.
They also brought up a witness who saw a man in red shorts in the field, arguing that since no red shorts were found on Worley's property, it could have been someone else.
But the tide really turned with the testimony that established his pattern. The sources all emphasized the powerful impact of Robin Gardner, his 1990 victim.
She took the stand and described, in harrowing detail, being run down by his truck, threatened with a screwdriver, and handcuffed.
It allowed the jury to see Worley not as a man claiming he was framed, but as a predator who had just escalated a proven method of operation.
And then there was the digital evidence. Detective David Morford from the Toledo Police testified about the cell phone records that put Worley at the scene for that critical 2-hour period.
But maybe even more damning were the search terms from his computer. Hogtied teen, rape, stranded, helpless.
It showed a mental fixation that mirrored the crime with terrifying specificity.
Even the defense's own witnesses ended up helping the prosecution. One longtime friend confirmed that the helmet found at the scene was the one he had bought for Worley years before.
Another friend testified about watching pornography with Worley and confirmed his desire to start a studio. But under cross-examination, the same friend stated that Worley's motorcycle never left him stranded.
Which just completely contradicted Worley's central alibi for being there.
The sheer weight of the evidence, the pattern established by Gardner, the digital forensics. It was insurmountable. On March 28, 2018, after less than 6 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict on 17 of the 19 counts,
including the critical charge of aggravated murder. And that moved the trial into the penalty phase.
The defense's goal here was to argue for a life sentence instead of death. They leaned heavily on the idea that Worley was a damaged man.
They called a criminal psychologist, Dr. John Fabian, who presented a diagnosis of sexual paraphilia disorder.
He argued the attack was motivated by sexual sadism connected with a fetish disorder. The defense was trying to mitigate his moral culpability, suggesting this was a crime driven by a deep-seated compulsion.
If they could show that this condition diminished his capacity for rational choice, it might sway the jury toward mercy.
They also introduced some vague claims, referencing an alleged incestuous relationship and even suggesting he might have had an accomplice.
But the prosecution dismissed these as desperate moves, arguing the shallow grave suggested the work of a single person.
The prosecution's counter was firm. They argued that despite any supposed disorders, Worley had an average upbringing and knew the difference between right and wrong.
They emphasized that the aggravating factors, the premeditation, the specific violence of the crime, far outweighed any suggested psychological impairment.
The prosecution also introduced some other evidence in the penalty phase. They presented audio recordings of Worley's sister telling an investigator that Worley was suspected of killing a prostitute in 2000 and another woman in the 1970s.
Neither of those resulted in charges, but introducing them was meant to show the jury a lifelong pattern of suspected violence.
And before sentencing, Worley himself made a statement. It was described as rambling, lasting 45 minutes, where he continued to claim someone else framed him.
It was a very difficult moment, especially when he referred to Sierah as a beautiful girl while denying any responsibility.
The jury recommended capital punishment, and Judge Jeffrey Robinson upheld it on April 16, 2018.
His statement at sentencing was very clear. He said, "If I thought there was a snowball's chance in hell that you were innocent, you'd be looking at a life sentence."
So Worley was sentenced to death, plus an additional 24 years and 3 months for the other felonies.
His defense appealed, arguing the close-knit community meant the jury was tainted, but the Ohio Supreme Court denied the appeal. His execution date, originally May 20, 2025, is currently stayed pending further motions.
And if the trial was the conclusion to the criminal act, the legislative response was the beginning of Sierah Joughin's legacy.
The push for Sierra's law was immediate. The system had failed because law enforcement told her family Worley was not on any violent offender database.
That one point drove the entire movement. The family and community activists argued that if a registry had been available, the community would have been warned.
They maintained that awareness might have prevented her murder.
The grassroots effort was massive. Right after the tragedy, in July 2016, an organization called Standing Courageous started a Change.org petition for a violent offender registry.
And it took off, gathering over 13,000 signatures very quickly.
That public pressure led directly to legislative action. Development of the statute began in February 2017.
The initial design for Sierah's law was ambitious. It proposed a public, searchable online registry, just like the sex offender registry, for felons convicted of murder, kidnapping, and abduction.
The goal was maximum transparency.
But this is where the debate got complex. It pitted public safety against civil liberties. Groups like the ACLU raised serious concerns.
They argued that a permanent public registry for all violent felons could be ineffective while also severely infringing on the rights of people who had been released.
They said it could create huge barriers to housing and employment, which would impede rehabilitation and might even drive released felons further underground.
So because of this debate, the bill was amended. This is a crucial compromise you need to understand. Instead of full public online access, the law was changed.
Under the final bill, residents have to go to their local sheriff's office in person and request a search of the database.
So the information is available, but the access is controlled. It passed after powerful testimony from Sierah's mother, Sheila Joughin.
The bill passed on December 6, 2018, was signed into law by Governor John Kasich, and went into effect on March 20, 2019. It was a rapid and profound legislative response.
And beyond the law, the community response has been enduring.
The community channeled its grief into action. They organized a Take Back the Roads memorial walk along the road where she was abducted. There was a memorial motorcycle ride with over 700 participants.
And a Joughin for Joughin 5K run that they had to cap at 1,600 people because so many came out to support the family.
The funds raised established the Sierah Joughin Memorial Scholarship Fund, benefiting graduates from her high school.
And her family founded multiple organizations. Her mother, Sheila Joughin, co-founded Keeping Our Girls Safe,
which focuses on advocacy and provides trauma-informed self-defense classes to the community at no cost. The sources say that by July 2025, they'll have served over 3,500 women.
And after the trial, her mother and aunt established Justice for Sierah, which focuses on community safety education in schools and hosts the annual Spirit of Sierah 5K race.
Just two final notes on the aftermath. In 2018, Worley's property was awarded to Joughin's estate. The family had the main barn, the site of the assault, demolished.
A tangible act of reclaiming the site. And in August 2020, the FBI and Sheriff's Department went back to search the property again, stating the investigation into Worley was ongoing, though the family said it wasn't related to Sierah's case.
It just speaks to the lasting suspicion around him.
And we should mention that Worley continues his attempts at manipulation. In 2022, he released a 105-page manifesto claiming his innocence and trying to connect his case to other cold cases to create confusion.
This brings our analysis to a close. This case is a painful example of a violent pattern that was allowed to continue because of systemic failures.
But it resulted in profound and lasting legislative success, all championed by the victim's family. The tragedy of Sierah's murder became a catalyst for significant reform.
Sierah's law now provides a mechanism for communities to gain knowledge about known violent offenders.
And the organizations created in her name are actively protecting others, ensuring her memory is honored through action. It's a testament to turning an unimaginable grief into a tangible public good.
For you, the listener, we want to leave you with this final thought, built directly from the material we've examined. The crucial lead that broke this case didn't come from a database. It came from a single, vigilant citizen who recorded a license plate number. So how does that shift the argument about whether we need a full public online registry versus a system that simply encourages and validates more active, suspicious citizen reporting for safety? Reflect on the balance struck in Sierah's law. Is it the right one between public knowledge and civil liberties?
It raises an important question. In a world of digital information, what is the most effective and ethical way for a community to safeguard itself from known violent recidivists?
Thanks for listening.